Adolf Hitler, the man who turned speeches into weapons and an entire nation into his army. On paper, he was a politician. In reality, he was the architect of genocide. Under his rule, 6 million Jews and millions of others were systematically murdered in what became the Holocaust. But his evil didn't stop there. He engineered World War II, the deadliest conflict in history, leaving over 70 million dead and entire cities reduced to rubble. The scariest part? He didn't claw into power with violence. He was voted in. Through rallies, propaganda, and promises of making Germany great again, Hitler convinced ordinary citizens that war was destiny and murder was patriotism. His speeches promised greatness. His legacy was ruin. If power corrupts, Hitler proved absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it annihilates. And the darkest lesson? Evil doesn't always storm in with guns. Sometimes it walks in through the ballot box.
Joseph Stalin. If Hitler was fascism's terror, Stalin was communism's iron fist. He ruled the Soviet Union through fear, famine, and firing squads. His great purges turned loyalty into a death sentence. One accusation, true or not, could send you to the gulags, Siberian camps where millions froze, starved, or simply vanished. Stalin didn't just kill enemies, he killed friends, generals, even supporters. To him, everyone was a traitor in waiting. Then came collectivization. It was supposed to feed the nation. Instead, it triggered mass famine, most brutally in Ukraine, where millions starved as grain was exported abroad. By his death in 1953, between 15 and 20 million people were gone. Stalin didn't just lead a country, he crushed it under paranoia and propaganda. And yet, statues of him still stand, proof that even history struggles to bury its monsters.
Mao Zedong, to some, the father of modern China, to millions, a man who starved his own nation. His great leap forward was meant to transform China into an industrial superpower. Instead, it triggered one of the deadliest famines in history. 30 to 45 million people starved to death. Crops rotted, families collapsed, officials faked reports, and no one dared question Mao. And when famine ended, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. Students turned into Red Guards, teachers beaten, neighbors denounced, culture destroyed, ancient temples smashed, books burned, history rewritten. Mao didn't just rule a nation, he rewired it with fear and blind devotion. And the most terrifying part? For millions, he's still remembered as a hero. Pol Pot, the man who turned Cambodia into a graveyard. His Khmer Rouge emptied entire cities overnight. Doctors, teachers, and even people with glasses were executed. Why? Because in Pol Pot's world, knowledge was a crime. From 1975 to 1979, nearly 2 million people, 1/4 of Cambodia's population, died. Forced labor, starvation, executions. The infamous killing fields piled with bones and skulls became his regime's signature. And the horror? This wasn't ancient history. It happened in the late 20th century. While the world debated, Pol Pot erased his country. When his rule collapsed, he fled into the jungle and died peacefully in his sleep, never facing true justice. Pol Pot proved evil doesn't always arrive in tanks. Sometimes it walks in with slogans and leaves behind only mass graves.
Idi Amin, the self-proclaimed last king of Scotland. History calls him something else, the Butcher of Uganda. Rising in the 1970s, he expelled Uganda's Asian population overnight, looted their businesses, and plunged the economy into chaos. Anyone who opposed him, politicians, journalists, even his own ministers, was tortured or killed. 500,000 Ugandans lost their lives. But Idi Amin wasn't just a dictator, he was a sadist. Bodies dumped in the Nile, rumors of cannibalism, entire villages wiped out by his soldiers. Meanwhile, Amin lived like royalty. Cars, mansions, parades. His people starved, but his ego feasted. When he was finally overthrown, there was no trial, no reckoning. He lived the rest of his life in luxury exile. Proof that sometimes evil doesn't get punished. It retires.
Benito Mussolini, the original fascist showman who turned Italy into his stage and the world into his disaster. He rose in the 1920s with black shirt thugs, silencing critics, censoring the press, outlawing parties. He built a cult of personality so absurd he posed as farmer, pilot, even military genius. Spoiler, he was none of them. Then came his fatal choice, allying with Hitler. Italy was dragged into World War II, bombed, invaded, humiliated. Mussolini's arrogance cost hundreds of thousands of lives. By the end, his people had had enough. Captured while trying to flee, Mussolini was executed. His body hung upside down in public. His fall was as dramatic as his rise. Mussolini proved you don't need competence to be a dictator, just arrogance, propaganda, and a nation willing to look away until it's too late.
Franco, the dictator who ruled Spain for nearly 4 decades. Not the loudest tyrant, but one of the most enduring. He rose during the Spanish Civil War, backed by Hitler and Mussolini. Victory came with rivers of blood, mass executions, concentration camps, and the infamous White Terror, where tens of thousands disappeared. Franco wasn't reckless, he was patient. He crushed culture, silenced dissent, and wrapped his regime in religion and nationalism. For decades, Spain lived as his prison. He outlasted World War II, he outlasted the Cold War, and he ruled until his death in 1975. When he finally died, Spain erupted in celebration, like a nation awakening from a nightmare. Franco showed that evil doesn't always roar with chaos. Sometimes it whispers with control. For generations.
Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il, the North Korean dictator who turned his nation into a prison and his people into props. He inherited power in the 1990s as famine devastated the country. Instead of feeding his people, he poured money into palaces, propaganda, and nuclear weapons. While millions starved, state media declared him a genius, a god, even a man who never needed to use the bathroom. But the cult wasn't funny, it was deadly. Speak against him, and entire families were sent to prison camps, tortured, or executed. Fear wasn't policy, it was survival. By the time he died in 2011, millions had lived and died under his shadow. Kim proved that a dictator doesn't need to conquer the world to be evil, only to devour his own.
So now you've seen how presidents turned nations into nightmares. But here's the scarier thought. What if the real power today isn't in politics at all? While dictators once controlled borders, there are companies right now quietly controlling your money, your food, even your thoughts. Boardrooms, not palaces. CEOs, not kings. If you want to know how corporations, not presidents, became the new rulers of the world, click the video right here. Trust me, it'll make dictators look almost old-fashioned.